I got 30 more seconds and then we're... All right, I'd like to call the City of Gardner Planning Commission meeting for August 27, 2019 to order. Would everyone please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now we'll do a roll call. I'll start to my far right with Commissioner Simmons-Lee.
Simmons-Lee here.
Ford here.
Roberts here.
Bowden here.
Mater here.
All right, we have a quorum of 5 commissioners. We'll go over the consent agenda. All matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion. If separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or from the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. We have one item, standing approval of the minutes as written for the meeting on June 23rd, 2019.
Chairman Bowden, I would like to request that we move the minutes to the regular agenda for discussion. I see an error that needs to be corrected.
Okay. I'll take a motion to move that to the regular agenda.
So moved.
Seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any against? Any abstentions? We'll move that to the regular agenda. Let's go ahead and start that on the regular agenda.
Great, thank you. Just a quick note within the minutes of the agenda item 2 from last month, where it states that Commissioner McNear nominated Tori Roberts as chair, seconded by Commissioner Gardner. That should read that Commissioner Mater nominated Tori Roberts as vice chair, seconded by Commissioner Gardner.
Any discussion on Commissioner matters? Anything from the city on that? Okay. Have a proposal to change Commissioner McNear to Commissioner Mater? Correct.
Well, yeah, it needs to read, Commissioner Mater nominated Commissioner Tori Roberts as vice chair, seconded by Commissioner Gardner, is how it needs to read.
Okay, they have a motion?
So I'll make the motion that we update the minutes as stated for the record to read what I just said.
Okay, second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mater and a second by Roberts. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
All right, regular agenda number 1, Quick Trip, SP-19-03, consider a site plan for the convenience store fuel station to be located at the southwest corner of South Gardner Road and West 108th Place. City.
Good evening, Commissioners. Okay. Hey, there it works. Okay. The subject properties before you tonight is the site is located at the southwest corner of 188th Street and Gardner Road and consists of approximately 9 acres. The property was annexed into the city back in 2001 and rezoned from agricultural to C3 commercial. In 2003, the property was platted as part of the Shanes Crossing subdivision and then re-subdivided as lots 5 through 8 of Shanes Crossing second plat. And currently, there are no improvements on the site. The total area of this property is approximately 9 acres, with the Quick Trip site consisting of approximately 6.4 acres. The site plan is for a gas station and convenience store. The city has been working with KDOT engineers and our engineers on proposed road improvements to 188th Street and Locust Road along with the intersection to Gardner Road. And these road improvements are scheduled to coincide with the construction of the Quick Trip site. The architecture and building design uses quality materials and style is consistent with the context. The entire building is faced with brick as the main material with aluminum and painted metal accents. As part of the site, it is designed with a truck fueling station, mainly geared towards truck traffic off of I-35. And that is, those islands are located on the back side of the site. On the front side of the site is more geared towards the vehicular traffic. There are 16 vehicle fueling stations at the front. The staff findings that this site is capable of accommodating the building's uses and other site design elements. The design and arrangement of buildings and open space is consistent with good planning and landscaping design. The architecture and building design uses quality materials and the style is appropriate for the context. The plan is in substantial compliance with the code. There are 3 administrative adjustments that the applicant has requested. First one is section 1707.040, large commercial transparency, 30% at street level. The applicability, reducing a site design standard such as landscaping requirements, parking quantity or location, open space requirements or dimension by less than 10% of the required standard. The proposed is the east elevation, South Gardner Road is at 23% transparency, and the north elevation of the main building facing 188th Street is 6%. And the applicant's response is an addition of park benches will augment the pedestrian traffic experience as they utilize the new sidewalks along 188th Street, more than an increase to the transparency of the main building. As you can see from this slide, you can see the front side is shows the window openings at 23%, and then of course on the side facing 188th is just the doorway that's all glass. The design ordinance seems to reference the need for a visual connection from the street level into an occupied space. The human visual connection is preferred and allows for a better relationship with the streetscape. The applicant's response is they believe adding park benches will augment the pedestrian traffic experience as they utilize utilize the new sidewalks along 188th Street, more than the increase to transparency. And the staff supports this adjustment request. The relief meets the code intent to implement a system of open and civic spaces for natural, recreation, social, cultural, and aesthetic needs of the community. The relief provides no perceived impact on the adjacent properties or public realm. And staff supports this adjustment request with the addition of 2 benches near the sidewalks along 188th Street. This allows for the pedestrian visual connection to the site in a different way than being able to see into the building. Administrative adjustment 2 is from section 1707.050, frontage design. Buffer edge access width limits 25% or 36 feet max width for any single access point. And applicability, increasing a site design standard such as a landscape requirement, parking quantity or location, open space requirement, or dimension by less than 10% of the required standard. Proposed is 38-foot driveway access width, which is just basically 2 feet more than what the ordinance allows for. The applicant response was the driveway access points were not conducive to large truck turning radiuses in and out of the site. As you can see from this slide, it shows that basically all the access points were at the 38 feet. And the code states that wherever the city engineer determines that the requirements will adversely impact the function of the transportation network in the vicinity of the site, either due to traffic impacts of the proposed use or the design of the access in relation to the streetscape, alternative access standards may be required to better meet the intent of the code. And the applicant's response was that we believe that increasing the turning radiuses into the site will create a safer movement for traffic in and out of the site. The city engineer has agreed that the change in access widths will not adversely impact traffic along the adjacent streets. The relief provided provides no perceived impact on the adjacent properties or public realm, and the staff supports this adjustment request. Where access is limited to a lot by the standards of any applicable frontage design standards, alternative access design standards shall be used, and the relief meets the code intent to provide an alternative for safe access into the site for larger vehicles. Administrative adjustment number 3. That's section 1708.030, Site and Landscape Standards, Table 8-1, Landscape Requirements, Foundation Plantings. The applicability is except for buildings permitted within 10 feet of right-of-way, foundation planting areas shall exist along at least 25% of street-facing facades and be at least 8 feet deep. The proposed is place foundation plantings basically away from the building, so not right up next to it. The applicant's response was building design and layout is not conducive to placing plantings next to the building. Again, the design ordinance seems to reference the need for a visual connection from the street level into an occupied space. The human visual connection is preferred and allows for a better relationship with the streetscape. The applicant's response is the building design and layout is not conducive to placing plantings next to the building. The applicant is providing bump out planting islands next to the parking adjacent to the building that is well above the 25% requirement of landscaping. They've also provided additional plantings along Gardner Road. The staff supports this adjustment request. The relief meets the code intent to create an attractive environment in the city and preserve the values of adjacent properties as development and redevelopment occurs. And the relief provides no perceived impact on the adjacent properties or the public realm. Staff recommends approval of the Quick Trip Site Plan, SP 1903, with the conditions outlined in the recommended motion. After a review of application SP 1903, a site plan for Quick Trip, tax IDs CP 78470000005, CP 784700000006, CP 7847000007, and CP 7847000008, and staff report dated August 27th. And actually, I'd like to make a correction on that. I think I included that a copy of kind of like a correction up to you guys. That really should read August 19th, 2019. The Plan Commission approves the application. The application provided the following conditions are met, and the final plat for Quick Trip, as consistent with this site plan, shall be recorded with the Johnson County Recorders and Tax Administration prior to the issuance of a building permit. 2, drive access onto 188th Street shall be right in and right out only. And then I also had a correction for number 3. And drive access onto South Gardner Road shall be a 3/4 access point. And it shall, drive access onto South Gardner Road shall be constructed as part of a future KDOT road project. So basically what we're saying is that the applicant will be allowed to do full access up until the point in time that KDOT pulls the trigger on the construction project. Number 4, approve signage application. 5, provide an additional 15 interior trees. 6, provide an additional 1 street tree along Locust Road. 7, provide an additional 1 foundation tree on the north middle parking lot island. 8, provide 2 park benches along the north right-of-way of 188th Street. And 9, removal of the northernmost street tree along Gardner Road.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If the applicant's here, the applicant may come forward and talk if they'd like.
Good evening. My name is Eric Eckhart, Quick Trip Corporation. Bob really covered on everything pretty well here, so I don't want to repeat a lot of this information. So I really just make myself available for any questions you guys may have in relation to the plan. And if we can go back to any of these screens, I can highlight anything you guys may have questions on.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open it up to the public first, and then as we do our discussion, we may call you back up. This isn't a public hearing item, but if anyone from the public would like to speak on this item, you may approach the podium, state your name and address, 3 minutes per individual, 7 minutes if you're speaking for a group. Thank you.
Kenneth Yoder, 30125 West 187th Street, Gardner. I was just wondering, on that 188th Street and Gardner Road, will there be a street light added there?
At Gardner Road and 108th Street.
Yeah, because
we
Quick
can-
Trip tends to get, from all the ones I've seen around, they tend to get a bit of traffic there, and it's already, sometimes during the morning, it can be hard to get in and out there.
Larry, he was asking if there's gonna be a light at Gardner Road and 188th Street.
Yes, as the road is rebuilt, 188th to the west, and the intersection is rebuilt, it will become a lighted intersection, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to approach? Okay, this is time for Planning Commission discussion. I'll start to my far right with Commissioner Simmons-Lee.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Commissioner Ford?
No questions at this time.
No questions.
The plan is well laid out. I don't have any questions.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, well, I don't have anything to add either. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion for this. Oh, sorry, Kelly.
I believe we have another condition that needs to be on the suggested motion. And this was basically requested by our engineering department here at the city. They wanted a condition put on that no direct access from the surplus property will be allowed to Gardner Road.
That's
Number 5.
number 5.
Number 5.
That's on the screen, but it's not.
It's
on
not
this
on
page.
the updated motion.
That is not on the one that I handed
So we
you.
Just
Yeah.
need to, whoever reads the motion will have to read the full updated motion, then add number 5 from the one in the packet to the motion.
After review of application SP-19-03, a site plan for Quick Trip tax IDs CP 784700000005, CP 784700000006, CP 784700000007, and CP 784700000008, and staff report dated August 27, 2019.
August 19th.
August 19th, okay. It says 27th on the screen.
The motion, sorry, Commissioner McNear, the motion should be the one that's in front of you, not on the screen, due to the changes.
Okay. August 19th, 2019, the Planning Commission approves the application provided the following conditions are met. Number one, the final plat for Quick Trip shall be recorded with Johnson County Tax Records and Tax Administration prior to the issuance of a building permit. 2, drive access onto 188th Street shall be right in and right out. 3, drive access on the South Gardner Road shall be a 3/4 access point. Drive access on the South Gardner Road shall be constructed as part of a future KDOT road project. Number 4, approved signage application. Number 5, provide additional 15 trees, interior trees, excuse me. Number 6, provide an additional 1 tree along South Locust Road. Number 7, provide 1 foundation tree on the north side, on the north middle parking lot island. Number 8, provide 2 park benches along the north right-of-way of 188th Street. And number 9, removal of northernmost street tree along Gardner Road.
Commissioner McNear, could I get you to amend number 7 to say provide an additional 1 foundation tree?
Provided an additional 1 foundation tree on the north middle parking lot island.
And also, can I get you amended to add a number 10 and then read number 5 on the screen?
Okay, removal of the northernmost, item number 10, removal of the northernmost
No.
street. Excuse me,
Number 5 on the screen.
okay, number 5 on the screen. No direct access, number 5, no direct access from the surplus property allowed to Gardner Road.
Second.
Second. Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNear and a second by Commissioner Roberts. Is there any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against? Any abstentions? Motion passes as stated by Commissioner McNear, 7-0. I mean, 6-0. Sorry, we're missing one.
Yeah.
All right. The next item is discussion item, planning commissioner training.
I'm gonna jump in quick. Anybody that has attended the meeting, if you would please sign in the back, that would be helpful. Thanks.
I'm gonna change the presentation. No, you're good. Good evening, Commissioners. Dave Knopick, Planning Consultant to the City of Gardner. As you know from our last meeting in July, we began a little training session which was primarily focused on feedback from the meeting last month with the intent to come back here and go through the formal training. I'll say formal, it's informal training. This is a discussion item, so it's an informal training presentation. Tonight, what I hope to do, since we have 2.5 hours to do this, we'll have plenty of time to get through it. I'm only kidding. But it'll be as long as you'd like it to be. I want to make sure that we do get to your questions, and as I'm going through the presentation, do feel free to interrupt if you have questions, especially if there's examples or thoughts that you're having because of recent cases and that. It's a good opportunity that if we're on a certain point, we can use that as a concrete example for some of the discussion. So I'm going to do my best to handle the screens and technology the best I can. So hang with me for a minute. I'm going to give you a little context for Planning Commission membership and meetings and the hearings that you have. The Kansas state statutes really outline what a Planning Commission is and what they do, their duties, the purposes of the Planning Commission. You can find that if you want to go looking at Kansas state statutes and you have nothing better to do. You can certainly read Chapter 12, Article 7 of that state statute. It covers a multitude of things, including not just the Planning Commission, but everything to do with the assignment of zoning and planning in general, platting and other elements that are there, comprehensive planning as well. The City of Gardner Municipal Code, you primarily work with the administration of Title 17 out of that code, but the Planning Commission is mentioned in Title 2, and it outlines the basic parameters for the commission and the establishment of the commission from the local standpoint. So there's actually 2 parts of your local code,
you're most engaged with Title 17. So when you see these staff reports, that's what you're dealing with, is the interaction of that element of the local codes. You also have to worry about court decisions, and hopefully your staff stays up to that. Your city attorney, who also helps support these things, is aware of various court cases that come up. Those things can influence the interpretation, the content, the administration, and the application of your planning regulations. Your criteria when you're looking at rezoning, those standards that are adopted in your local code have been framed around the Golden case, which came out of Overland Park many years ago, but those were criteria and questions that the court, this Kansas State Supreme Court, laid down and said, if you're following this and you're looking at these reasonable things, your judgments from that, your recommendations from that, the way you have your discussions will be seen as legal, okay? They're seen as you followed the correct criteria. You're not showing favoritism. You're trying to assess it in some logic or framework, and we'll show some of those questions later. You also have a set of adopted bylaws, which I hope your staff as well as yourselves will periodically become interested in. I'm sure the chairman's got to have at least some working knowledge of those bylaws, because they do set down your operational parameters for yourself. In many communities, the bylaws also talk about some of the ethical standards that you employ on yourself, okay, and you place on yourselves as part of this. So it's nice to visit those bylaws periodically, be aware with how you're supposed to be operating. If there's updates that need to be made, make those updates. Go through that process. State law also allows you to have a budget. It doesn't happen very often. It actually is assigned by the council of the city, but they do allow in there, and I believe it's section 745 of the state statute that says the planning commission can have a budget, and you can hire as you see fit with the agreement of the council. You don't get to just do it on your own, but it is an interesting aspect of state law. I know very few communities in Kansas where the Planning Commission actually has a budget from which they operate. It is assigned to them through the city council. Tonight, the topical outline you'll see here, I want to try to cover 5 different point areas, and you're going to find I'm not going to spend much more time talking about law. I'm not going to spend much more time talking about the ordinances. I really want to talk more about how you operate and what your role is within the community. And most of this is based on 30 years of dealing with planning commissions, either from the private sector side or when I was working on the public sector side. Experiences I had, times when it was tough for me as a staff member to understand where we were going, times when I wondered what were we really trying to accomplish, and then times where there was much clarity. So a lot of this is formulated around practical types of items. So we will talk about that idea of accepting your role and responsibility, preparing for hearings, conducting those hearings, managing interactions, which is really critical today, especially with social media being what it is. 30 years ago wasn't an issue. You know, you didn't worry about things like Facebook and texting meetings and things like that. Today, it's a whole nother world when it comes down to interactions. Some places you will see it, and I hope you don't do it during meetings. You will see people in those online interactions when they're sitting right up there at the dais, and that is really not appropriate. I've actually sat on staffs where I've received messages from somebody at the dais while there was a presenter at the podium talking to them. And that's really not something that I would encourage you to do. So just be aware of that. And then finally, providing meaningful recommendations, which I think is very important. There's a lot of text that I'll try to show, but I bolded, if you will, the text that I think is most important out of these paragraphs and sentences. And I think it's really important that we focus a few minutes on each of those things. So, for instance, you'll see each individual member of the commission is expected to act in a manner that is appropriate for a representative of local government. I want you to understand you are an extension of the government. You're not a paid employee, obviously. You're a volunteer citizen that's filling a role, okay? But you're an extension and an example of what governance in the community is. So when you hear me talking about behavior standards and the idea of civility, which is a hot topic in a lot of discussions and in a lot of circles, understand I see the Planning Commission and the City Council as that extension of governance and sets the tone for the community as to what a civil discussion really is. This forum should be a place where civil discussion occurs. Anything outside of those parameters, and I think you saw it at the last meeting when Larry stood up and made a comment to the audience because there was some background noise and things happening back here. That is a very appropriate thing to do, but you do it with grace And you do it with a strong tone so that they understand you're serious. We're here to discuss things in a civil manner, in a civil way. So understand, when you took on this role, you inadvertently became a representative of the governance here in Gardner. So just be aware of that. The second part of that, you'll see the key word for me is privilege. Doing this is a privilege, and I hope everybody here sees it that way. I know at times it's painful. I know at times it's a little bit burdensome. I know at times it's an inconvenience. But at the end of the day, you've been afforded a privilege. You've been appointed to a role that's critical in the growth and development of this community and where it goes with its future. The founding fathers and mothers of this community took those roles seriously. As the community has evolved, other leaders have taken that role seriously. Some have not. But you can tell the difference between those who do and those who don't. And you can tell the difference in the way the community progresses and moves forward. And that's really critical to understand today. And I think in public service, that word has been lost in many ways. It's an honor and a privilege to serve your community at the end of the day. And I hope you all will feel that way and understand that, because it drives how committed you are to the role that you've taken on. So you have to accept that. You have to own the fact that that is part of the role that you have. Keys to Plan Commission service. I'm not going to read all 8 of these, but these are 8 points that I think are very, very important to you to understand. You need to be familiar with the context in which you're operating, and a couple of these bullet points talk to that. Get familiar with the land use and development policies of this community. Understand that there's a comprehensive plan out there. Nobody's asking you to memorize this stuff, but have a working knowledge of what the framework is so that when staff is presenting items and they're talking about the comprehensive plan, you have enough familiarity that you can say, yeah, I've seen that section, and I do think that's a very important aspect of the community. Or when they're talking about a section of code or a policy element that's out there, you can recognize that. So you want to be up to date with some of the policy discussions that are going on at the council level, some of the things that get adopted, but your staff is going to help guide you there. Their staff reports are going to have content because a lot of that content drives their recommendations, okay, within their role. You want to understand your responsibility in the state law and the local regulations, and that's why I brought those up to begin with. Nobody expects you, again, to memorize all those laws, but they do expect that you have a working knowledge and understanding of what your role is. You are primarily a recommending body to the city council at the end of the day, okay? You do have some administrative authority, things like site plans and final development plans that end here, okay? Because there is not any reason to go further with those into the political process. So you want to be aware of that, so you want to know which role you're in. The BZA has a very different role than the Planning Commission. BZA is a quasi-judicial a body, if you will, in the sense that when things come to them, they are rendering a decision, okay? And that decision is only appealed to district court. It doesn't go to council. Planning Commission goes to city council for final decision. So it's a little bit different in that sense. You want to know the different players that you're dealing with and know that everybody you're dealing with is on the same team as you are, but they're viewing things from a different perspective and have a different role, okay? The city council's role is very different than your role, okay? Your role is to assess things from the standpoint of what's being brought to you from staff and the codes and regulations and plans that are out there and make an objective determination towards your recommendation. Do you really believe that this is the way that the city should be going? Is this the vision? Does it help accomplish that vision? And it is okay for the city council to have a different opinion than you do, okay? It is okay to do that. You should not be offended by that. But hopefully everybody understands why there may be a difference of opinion. And that's important. That's why it's important when you're making your motions and things like that, that there is a record of your discussion that talks to what values you saw that framed that motion, okay? Doesn't make your values any less important than the council's values, but understand in a decision-making role, there is a different element that they get to utilize as that decision-making authority. Staff is probably the most constrained role that you'll see. Their job is really to bring forward to you, this is what our policy says, this is what our law says, this is the recommendation of staff. When just like this set of administrative adjustments and the recommendations that are there, they're providing you a record that says, your applicant's asking for this, under code to do this, they have to do these things, or they have done something that suffices in addressing what is substantially being requested out of that code. That's their role, okay? Your job is to determine if you believe that or not. Do you think that's really being met, okay? So they have to state their case, and your applicants should be stating their case as well. You do want to also be aware of other laws. Number 5 there is very critical now, okay, for anything you do. Understand the open meetings laws, understand conflicts of interest, understand ex parte communications, and really follow those things. Those operational elements are very, very important today, okay? Many times an initial challenge that may come to one of your recommendations or decision of council, they will look for technicalities that have not been met, okay, or have been violated. Did you violate open meetings when you conducted your discussions about this? Oh, by the way, if you texted a quorum of yourselves and started talking about this outside the meeting, you did, okay? So you have to be aware what open meetings really mean. It's not just the fact that you all physically met somewhere. You can have a virtual meeting. So you want to be watching for that. Conflicts of interest are the same way. There are very technical conflict of interest elements. It's very easy to declare a conflict of interest when there's a monetary gain that you might get out of rendering that recommendation or decision. But understand there's a lot more gray area. And it is more important probably to side or err on the side of pulling yourself away from that conflict of interest if you have that question. I'm not saying you have to, but if you believe you may have an issue, that is why you have a city attorney representative and a staff. Is before your meeting, it's good to contact them, discuss the issue with them, and get a determination to help you make that decision. In many cases, that city attorney or staff will tell you, well, that's a pretty gray area. It's really about what impression do you want to leave with the citizens. And that becomes a little bit difficult, okay? Because that comes down to what do you believe you want to do. But do be aware of those things. I think you handle the ex parte communications pretty well. I watched a couple of meetings prior to this where those things were revealed if you had them, and that's just an important procedural part of what you do. Number 7 is the last thing on this slide that I want to hit on. Objectiveness, respectfulness, and ethical. Those are 3 really key points for what you do. Be respectful to everybody who approaches you in the discussion. You may not agree with them. You may not like them. They may not like you. But none of that matters in this forum. In this forum, you're here to assess the proposal that's in front of you, not necessarily the person making the proposal. So we want to be very careful about respectfulness and being objective and not making up our minds too early in the process because, well, that guy before, he did this or that, and I don't like it, okay? Then this item's going to come up again on 8 about planning to attend all meetings. It's going to transfer, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Prepare to conduct these public meetings. Really take your preparation seriously. Staff works hard to get a packet out to you ahead of the meeting as far in advance as they possibly can. Do take a look at that packet material. I have been in meetings where commissioners have walked in and they're just opening the envelope for the first time right there at the meeting as they're sitting down. I hope that has never happened to any of you. If it has, I hope you were very discreet about it and nobody witnessed it or saw it. But at the end of the day, there's a reason why staff goes through the exercise it does, and that's to help prepare you for the conversation and the aspect of this job that is very public. And again, you are going to be in a very public realm on most of this. Understand everyone receives due process. That's an obligation to the staff. It's an obligation to the city governance system. Every person, every proposal, if they choose to come through a process, has the right for due process. Okay? We can't deny them entering into the system, no matter how ridiculous the proposal may be. They have the right to do that. We can advise them that this isn't ready. We can advise them that they shouldn't. It may not be time. We can do those things as staff, but we can't deny them the right to make application and actually go through the process. So that's an important element of this. The staff, as I mentioned before, is guided by the adopted laws and policies. They're making sure that the legal requirements and the technical elements and the administrative processes are followed. And they're really in the same, again, we talk about the same team. They're talking about promoting and protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the community at large. That's part of what you're really doing at the end of the day. When you're recommending approval on a development proposal, that's a big factor. Does this promote and protect those things? That's what citizens are looking for you to do, okay? And then what we want to do by good preparation is really be able to conduct efficient meetings. Tonight was a very efficient meeting, okay? And you want it to be effective, okay? You want to make sure that you're getting the decisions right, that you're making things happen the way that they're happening. And that's, the guidance is fine with that motion, doing what you're doing, because again, you want to make sure that you leave that record of this is effectively what we've done, okay? And everybody understands that. So again, planning to attend all the meetings, be here every time you can. There are conflicts in the schedule, but you've made a commitment. Remember, I talked about that privilege. It's a privilege to be here. Make that a priority on your calendars. Be prepared. Come into the meetings ready to go. Read the packet, reread it. Go ahead and make site visits. It's okay, okay? You should. You know, get familiar with the physical qualities of what's out there. I'm a firm believer that there is an art to what we do as planners, okay? There's quote unquote the science side of it, and this is sometimes I have discussions with staff even here a little bit about basic parameters that are out there in the code, sometimes regarding setbacks, sometimes prescribing different building qualities and that. But I'm a firm believer that the site can tell you a lot about what is right and what is wrong. Visiting the site and understanding the context gives you a whole nother perspective of what's being proposed in front of you, okay? Because now you've had that physical experience to see when somebody's talking about, well, there really shouldn't be a traffic conflict here. And maybe you're out there for 10 or 15 minutes and you watch the traffic pattern and you can kind of relate to what's being talked about. Those are critical elements that feed your decision-making or your recommendation-making. So I encourage you to do that, but I will tell you that item 7, that ex parte communications, try to avoid them. You're not out there for the neighbors to all of a sudden gather around you and start talking at you and jawing at you about the proposal and trying to sway you in your decision-making. You need to try not to engage in that kind of activity when you're making a site visit. So that sometimes means you're driving by, you're watching some things discreetly, you're not making yourself just readily visible by walking on the property all by yourself and being out there. So you want to watch for those things. If you do get approached in that context, make sure you're reporting it, just like any ex parte communication. When you come to the meeting, you're going to reveal, I did make a site visit, I was approached by 3 neighbors, here's roughly what they talked about. Great, you've done your job. The hard part is when you're there, you don't want those folks to get you into a corner where you say, yeah, I'm kind of like you, I don't think this fits here. You make that offhanded comment before a public hearing is made, you may have a very serious technical issue later on if somebody legally challenges your recommendations and decisions here, okay? Because they're gonna say, you didn't even listen to the application. You didn't even listen to both sides of this. You were swayed and had your mind made up when you walked in the room. I'm not saying they would win the case, but they would certainly make that argument. I know I would if I was in that boat. So just be aware of that. And also, when you make your site visits and you're reading the packet, if you have questions, get those questions to the staff before the meeting if you can. That way they can integrate some of that into their staff presentation potentially, because they may have 2 or 3 of you. Remember, open meetings, we're not supposed to be cross-conversing in a way that might violate open meetings. But if each of you come to staff and they're getting the same question 3 times, they will know that in their presentation they need to make an adjustment. Let's address that. It seems to be an interest of more than one planning commissioner. So let's get that done. So if you can get those questions to them ahead of time, that's great. You know, let them do that, let them do their preparation so they're informed when they come in the meeting and are able to many times address it proactively to you. You don't have to spend time asking the question and going through the discussion at that point in time. The site may beg a question when you make your site visit. You may see something out there and wonder, I didn't see anything in the report that says anything about this. Ask the question, staff, did you consider this, or I noticed this? Can you talk to it to tell me what that may mean in regard to the future development of the property? So be aware of that. All of this is important about preparation. If you walk in here cold and the citizens are out for blood, you're going to be in a real way of hurt. Okay, it's going to be very difficult for you. That meeting is not going to be easy. No meeting is really easy, but when you're conducting these public meetings, I think it's important for you to understand the folks that come up to the podium, just like you saw tonight, the traffic question on the signalization. You're going to have people who are up here who have never been in this forum before. They don't know what the parameters are. They don't understand what's going on. They see the formality of it. They see the podium, the dais. They see you behind the screens here, looking at them, and they've never done anything like this before. So they may be nervous, and they may not be making the best presentation in the world, but try to make them feel comfortable, okay? Work on that. Seem like you're engaged with them, listening to them. That helps. When I can make eye contact with you all and see you, and I see if I'm making a connection or maybe there's a question that's coming up, it helps me to relax and go, okay, they're hearing what I'm saying, or I'm saying it in an understandable way, and they're willing to let me go on, okay? So it does make me feel more comfortable. This is an opportunity for you, again, as that representative of governance, to really set the tone about how government behaves here in Gardner and what the standard is. Yes, we want professionalism, okay? Yes, we want you to be as informed as possible. Yes, we'd like you to remove all that emotional stuff that comes to the podium and try to focus in on the issues of the day. But as you know, there's no controlling it at that point, okay? You set the tone for the presentation and the discourse related. They're here to talk to you. Last month, one of the things that really got under my skin a little bit had nothing to do with what you did, but when I see two developers, one at the podium and another who have different opinions, and they're engaging each other in a conversation that has no place here, that is just not the right way to conduct things, okay? They should have known better, but also for you all, it's okay to say, please stay on course directing yourself to us as the Planning Commission, because they're here to talk to you. They're not here to talk to the people in the audience. They're not here even really to answer or to ask questions directly of them. They're here to ask you questions. They're here to put things on your plate. And if you choose that that's an important question, you can then, when the time comes, engage the applicant or the other citizen and ask them about that question. But they're addressing you at that point. That's what this forum is about. It's not about the public conversation back here in the interactions that go on. And that's where Larry was right to stand up and say, folks, this is what we're here for tonight. Okay, engage in this. Emotions are the part of the citizens. They are going to run high. I feel for every Planning Commission chair that's out there, because there is a side that's very empathetic with people when they're talking about their homes and their investments, and they break down into tears, and it's not always the most rational conversation, but it's a line of thought that's in their mind, and they're talking about personal stories and things like that, and you have to find a way to break it off, and it's not always easy, okay, because these folks are being driven by emotions sometimes. And it's okay for them to display that emotion. It shows the meaningfulness of the issue to them, but at the same time, they're under a time limit, and you all have to stay to your conversation at hand. And that does make it difficult. So I do empathize with, especially the chair, in those instances, because it is his or her responsibility to be the one that kind of goes, ma'am or sir, we need to move on. We've heard that 5 times, We can certainly understand where you're coming from. Do you have anything else to add? And then you want to do that in a respectful manner. I just put a website location here. I'll probably share it with staff. It's an interesting article about the top 10 mistakes that planning commissions make when they're holding meetings. There's 10 items here that I'll briefly touch on for you that I think are important for all this. Again, don't assume everybody is informed. Introduce yourselves in the purpose of the meeting at hand. Have that introductory piece, ready. Many planning commissions will have a scripted intro when they're first starting the meeting. And it is a little bit canned and rehearsed and everything else, but it does set the tone for the meeting. If you want to watch a planning commission that does a pretty good job of that, where I know they have a script, the City of Olathe Planning Commission is online. You can take a look at that. The start of their meeting, their chairperson he reads about ex parte communications. There's a set of different items that he touches on right at the beginning as a summary, talks about you're only going to have 3 minutes to speak on XYZ items. These are the parameters. I have always found that helpful when I've done public meetings. Many times in my work, I don't do the formal public hearing or run the formal public hearing, but I've got to run public meetings and long-range planning efforts. And when I do that, I have found it's kind of like the Phil Donahue show. You know, you have to get up there and say, here are the parameters. This is the rules for tonight's discussion. And then you got to be willing to hold to them. And even when groups are in the 100 or 200 range and it's 2 or 3 of you facilitating that, they will respect those rules if you set a tone early on for what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior. So be aware of that. Be interested and respectful of all speakers and all sides. Whatever you do, please do that. Understand, you don't have to agree with them, but be respectful of where they're coming from. Remember the meeting's being recorded, okay, and being watched, okay? You don't have a live stream going on, but it does get online when it's working, right? When the system's working. So it does get online, it makes its way out there. Understand nowadays there could be people in the audience recording it. Used to not be quite that way. It wasn't easy to just walk in with the cassette recorder back in the day, right? Now any phone, any small device basically can be a recording device. And this is a public forum and a public setting. So you're not just being recorded necessarily through official means, you're also being potentially recorded through unofficial means. And you do not know where that's going to end up. You might have an idea where it's going to end up, but you do not know where that's going to end up. So be very, very careful of that. Number 7's always critical. It's kind of like marriage, right? Listen, 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 communicate, communicate, communicate. That's what number 7's really about. Make sure you're listening. Listen to what they're saying. Don't be afraid of recesses, continuances, and other meeting management tools. It's okay. If things seem a little bit unruly, you're not sure what's happening, it's okay to take a recess to get advisement from your city attorney or from your staff, or to just get a break, to cut the tension in the room, okay? It is okay to do that, but you want to make sure everybody's on board with that. You want to make sure the staff's on board, you're on board, and that it's handled correctly, because there's a certain way to make those motions if you're making recesses or continuations, so you want to make sure you do those accurately and right, because you might put a time frame on it, right? And you want to hold to that time frame, and you all have to be respectful for that, okay? One thing that I will tell you that concerns me a little bit is when you're voting, make sure if you are going to abstain, that there is viable reason for why you're abstaining. You cannot just abstain because it's convenient, okay? I don't want to be identified with making a recommendation. That doesn't cut it, folks. You're in the seat. You've accepted the role, and you need to make those determinations. Now, there's appropriate times to abstain, okay? I have seen instances where abstention was very much appropriate because somebody was really not informed of the issue correctly, or they were, for whatever reason. I've seen, I'll tell you one place where I've seen it where I think it's kind of questionable. I've seen people abstain for the fact that they weren't at the past meeting, so they won't vote on the minutes. Well, I wasn't there, so I can't tell you if it's an accurate record or not. Is that good or bad? If you read it, do you have questions about it? If there's no questions about it and the other commissioners are fine with it, I don't see a reason for abstaining, right? So we want to be careful with those things. I'm going to stop here for just a second. Anything that I've brought up that you have questions about or concerns about, or things that you've witnessed that you'd sit there and go, you know, we did this one time.
I have a question,
Go ahead.
actually. When it comes to the abstention, because I've been on the planning commission in the past, and we've had an abstention, and there was a valid reason, and the person actually removed themselves from the dais. Is that an appropriate action?
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
if you
so
don't mind?
usually that's involving a conflict of interest. Okay, so I'm gonna dovetail the two together. They're abstaining for conflict of interest. City, I will say the city legal advisors there are different ways that they see that. So different cities do see it different ways. The cleanest way is to declare the conflict of interest up front before the item is heard. As it's being introduced, it's okay for a commissioner to say, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Chairman, I have a conflict of interest here. I'm not going to disclose it, but there is a personal conflict of interest on this item, so I will not be voting on this item, and I'll be removing myself from the bench during this period of discussion. It's a clean way because what it does is it removes them from having any potential influence in the conversation. So I would say, yes, I like that, but I tend to be very conservative on technical issues like that. I have seen other cities where they'll just come off the dais and sit in the audience. I've seen issues where they've actually come off the dais and then been part of the public hearing because their conflict was they had an issue because they were a neighboring property owner. So they didn't leave the room. But most times in a clear-cut conflict of interest where somebody is going to abstain, I usually advise get yourself off the dais and out of the room because you don't want the air of
Right.
the feeling that you influence something because.
Right, and I recall correctly, I think this particular time, it was actually the individual was running late and had indicated to staff that they were gonna be behind, and if I remember right, that was part of the reason for the abstention is that they weren't here for all of the presentation and discussion and couldn't make a recommendation because they missed part of it. And, life happens, right? They knew they were going to be 30 minutes late and they didn't feel right in voting because they weren't here for the entire presentation.
And I do think...
Is that a valid?
Yes, I think that's a valid abstention. I do think that if I walk in the middle of the public hearing or 3/4 of the hearing's over, or I didn't hear the applicant speak and I'm not sure that I've got all that meat, I think it's the same thing as making up your mind too quickly. How do you make up your mind without the full benefit of what's been heard? And so I think there are times when that abstention is very, very appropriate. Okay.
I would think that's a valid abstention, but I don't know if there would be a reason to remove yourself from the dais.
There may not be because it's not a
Well,
conflict.
I mean,
It's not a
that
conflict
was-
of interest.
Well, and that,
Yeah.
that was, part of my, how do you act?
Yeah.
Because, what happens if, next meeting I get hit by a truck.
Right.
But I still make the meeting. I don't know.
Yeah.
When is it appropriate to go sit in the audience? Or I think at the time the individual just pushed back the chair, and I don't think the individual went and sat in the audience.
So the key that I'm gonna tell you is that's why you have a city attorney and staff sitting here, because different cities do it different ways. There's not a wrong or a right way, but there is a way. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Larry. You were gonna. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
I was going to ask, let's say hypothetically you're in that conflict of interest, like, this evening with Quick Trip, that you're on the governing body for the corporation and you're involved in the development. So you remove yourself from that. Is it appropriate to then be part of the presentation to the rest of the staff, or if you're directly involved with it?
I would tell you no. Okay. Again, I said earlier, I always err on the conservative side.
Right.
I believe that anything that has that smell test to it and you feel uncomfortable with the smell, that you should probably avoid it, because again, if there's a technical challenge, especially if it's a controversial item, that technical challenge, you could lose on that point because you're leaving it to a judge, you're leaving it to some other party. It's not you all determining that. So my tendency is to lean that way. I don't know if from the city attorney's side, if you see that differently, but I would say you're best off not being part of that. I understand when you're a citizen and you have a property that's right there and it's a detrimental impact and you're the only one, you own the property. I understand coming up and pleading the case. Short of hiring an attorney and hiring in many small towns, you can't do that. So what you're dealing with is times where those folks do. But to make the formal presentation, that's a little dicey to me. I don't know if you have an opinion on that or not, or have even seen that.
I've seen it before. Small communities, so like you said, they're a little different. But yeah, anytime you can steer away from that appearance of impropriety, for example, if one of you all was on the governing board of Quick looking at the presentation,
So,
you can make that happen, yeah.
so Bob, I know we had a little joke about this. Hold your cup up. So I will tell you, okay? I was worried when Bob went out of here and said, "Oh, I'm going to get my drink," and it's in a big Quick Trip cup. Even that little message has impact, okay? Staff walks in here with their drink cups for Quick Trip, and Quick Trip's up for a public hearing. I mean, there may not be anything wrong, okay? That may be the only store in town, okay, especially in a small town. I'll applaud him for at least making the effort, even though we got a little laugh out of it. But he made the effort to say, I don't want that to happen. It kind of smells bad. Now, some people are really familiar with Quick Trip would even know the straw in the lid, right? So, you know, that's just the way it is. But I think as the attorney is stating here, those are the kinds of things you need to be cognizant, and I think you should be more sensitive to that than less sensitive to it. And again, there's nothing wrong with getting that advice before the meeting and coming to your staff and coming to the attorney and fully disclosing that. Anything you talk to the city attorney about as a planning commissioner, that's going to be a confidential conversation. He's offering advice to you on how to operate from a governance standpoint within the laws of that are predicated here for open meetings and conflict of interest and things. So that advisement is coming to you confidentially, so you can have that conversation and really disclose to the attorney, here's the specifics. You can't do that here, and you shouldn't, okay? But you can do it in that conversation, and it's a protected conversation at that point. So do use those folks. Use the director. Go to the director first, okay? And say, hey, Larry, this is what I'm thinking. This is my issue, my potential problem. He'll probably prod you with a few questions so that he's got some background and can help you with that. But he'll also at some point say, now you're getting into a realm where I think we should approach the city attorney and make sure, you know, because that's going to be the rational judgment, okay?
With regard to 9 and 10, if we're during the process of a meeting or a hearing, and it becomes unclear to you, if you want to accomplish something in that meeting, you don't know quite exactly the right way to go about doing it, or the right question to ask, or the right procedure to call for.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an appropriate time to ask for a recess, regroup outside of the, you know, so that you know the proper, well, in the middle of a meeting, how do you get that advice without A, looking stupid to the public, B, you know, maybe not
Right.
coming across the right way, especially on a recorded or streaming video,
Right.
and remain professional. How can you give us some insight on how to handle that, please?
I think again, that's when you rely on going to the city attorney in the conversation. Okay, so you are in the public forum. Okay, we're in the meeting, right? The question comes up. One is, if it's a procedural question, it's not stupid. Okay, that is something that can be answered in a public forum, and you should feel comfortable asking the procedural question of the right parties. And that sometimes it's not the staff planner, sometimes it is the attorney or the director of the department that you want to go directly to, because it's outside of the actual case. It's something you're concerned about procedurally, and therefore you're wanting to understand it better. And that is not that to me, when the public hears that, that's conscientious. Okay? When the public is hearing that you're engaged at that level, that you want to make sure you're doing things right, okay, that is not stupid. It won't make you look stupid. Okay? I'm trying to think of a situation where it could get dicey. You know, again, I would think, and I'm going to defer a little bit to you, okay? I would think if it's a concern that you have where the discussion has led to a point that something you did not believe was a conflict of interest is becoming one, I think there may be a way procedurally to bring that up and say, I think what I need is a little bit of legal advice as to where I stand in this, you know, as far as conflict of interest, and that might be cause for a recess to allow you guys to have a private conversation about that to determine if that's the case. Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Just to piggyback on what I think you're asking, what if, you know, he has an idea of a motion that he wants to make that's a little different one staff has provided? How would he go about that?
Well, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too, because you do have the freedom to make a motion different than what staff's recommending, okay? And I think that part of what Kelly is talking about there, the important part of that is you don't necessarily need a continuance or a recess for that. It is okay to hammer out the motion out here publicly, okay? Again, it's not something that displays stupidity or anything. It displays the fact that you're a volunteer citizen trying to do your job, you know? Larry might, let me.
Yeah, the best caveat I can give you, the best direction I can give you on that is if you truly have a concern or you need some clarity on an issue, or you have a question about changing a motion, the best thing you can do is direct your question or issue to the chairman.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let the chairman make the decision as to who that should go to. That's his job to direct the meeting, or her job to direct the meeting. And then if they need a recess, or if they want clarity, or if they have a question, they may not even know where to go to exactly. They may ask staff and say, who has the best answer for that, or who has the correct information? Or they might go directly to the city attorney and say, is this the proper procedure, or we'd like to change this motion, what's the proper wording for doing this? So that again can all be done in the meeting, but it's usually the conflict of interest, concern, or the perception of conflict of interest that is the most usual reason to have some step down and have a private discussion.
Right. And we're going to talk about the chairman's role in a minute, because there's a burden in that role, okay? And he or she, right, Tori? He or she, the burden they carry is they are managing the meeting. They are the managers of the meeting, okay? The staff's not the managers of the meeting. The attorney's not the manager of the meeting. The people presenting are not the managers of the meeting. Your chairman is that manager, okay? And I think what Larry's talking about is absolutely appropriate. You can raise the question to the chairman, and what that displays is the same kind of demeanor that you're expecting from this audience. You're addressing this board. I'm addressing my chairman. You're respecting that line, if you will, right, and allowing the chairman to do that. Larry's right. The conflict is the big item where you have that. Now, I have seen recesses used where the chairman goes, we've been at this for, you know, an hour and a half. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. Do I have a motion to support that, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. But the idea is you're not going out here and talking with people about the issue. Okay? I see Kelly's hand going up out of the side here, so go ahead.
Well, that's what I was hoping you'd get to, is that if you're hoping to hammer something out back there, it's still ex parte, or it's not transparent. You got to do it in the meeting, right?
Yeah. So managing meeting interactions, I'm going to go a little deeper here, because that's what your questions are starting to head on, right? We're really talking about our interrelationship and our management of our discussions. So I've changed the slide a little bit here.
Dave.
You need to manage your pre-meeting and hearing stuff.
Dave.
Oh,
Before you
sorry.
move on.
This eye doesn't work as well as this eye. Sorry.
Just to clarify, the meeting is streaming.
Oh, okay.
And remember to use your microphones.
I think mine's on, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, good. So everything I've whispered under my breath has been heard, hasn't it? Yeah, okay, great. So understand, you have pre-meeting and hearing interactions, you have during the meeting interactions, you have post-meeting interactions, right? I want you to be very sensitive to this. Is the point where that Kelly's bringing up and where we're starting to talk a little bit here. You know, those interactions you have to be very careful about. Again, there's the ex parte kind of communications, but your job is not to call a recess and go walking down in the audience and try to hammer solutions out off the record, okay? That's not your job. You should avoid that at all costs. You should not be exposed to the public. I believe if you have to go to the restroom, there's a way to get to a restroom over here, right? That's your out. You take that recess, you don't come out here. You go out behind there and you go take care of the business. Now the same thing holds Don't be having a discussion back there about the item, because you are now in recess and you could be in violation of open meetings law. So you have to be careful about how many of you are back there, what perception are you sending, who's going there and doing what, and all that good stuff, okay? So you just have to be aware of what that recess is intended to do. People are watching you from the standpoint, you can see in that first paragraph at the bottom, there's observers present. There's watchdog groups, the city council and other governing officials, people seeking elected office. I've had planning commission meetings a year in advance. People who were running for city council offices would start appearing at the planning commission meetings to either gather information about things that are going on from a development standpoint, and also to see what the interactions are like. Okay, so you need to be aware that there are people seeking office sometimes here. You have media representatives, formal and informal. You got web bloggers. Those are media representatives as far as I'm concerned. Somebody's out there blogging live about what's going on and what kind of jerks you all are and everything else. And there's nothing you can do about that communication. I'm sorry, okay? But be aware that that's out there, okay? And they're watching everything there. How you handle it, I've talked about this before, speaks well of local governance, reflects the community value of civility in the public realm, okay? So it's important. Even when you walk in this room, so Commissioner Bowden came in today. The joke we had is we got here a little before the door was unlocked. So we arrived right at about 6:30. You were doing your job. It's all okay, okay? But we got here a few minutes early, and I pulled the doors, and I kind of turned to him and just said, well, they either canceled the meeting on us or they just don't want us there, right? Which is all fine. But from the minute that Commissioner Bowden got out of his truck, okay, he needs to watch who he's interacting with. You all do too, as you come walking into the room. You may have very close friends sitting in this audience. This is not your time to socialize. You're here to conduct business. It can give the perception that you're on that person's side. You've already determined. And that perception is fact in the media realm, okay? So you need to be leery of that as you're coming in to get up to the dais, to get your stuff taken care of. Yes, there may be times when somebody approaches you. The idea is to have the cordial conversation, say, good to see you. We'll be hearing about the case later. You know, get them away from you as quick as you can, but be friendly, okay? Because you don't want to be perceived as, oh, that vote's already locked up. You know, that's not a good situation, okay? So you do want to watch all of those different things, okay? The last sentence there too is I want you to be very careful about how you use social platforms, social media platforms, okay? It's not the appropriate place to express your individual thoughts regarding planning commission members, recommendations, or processes, okay? You may hate the commissioner sitting next to you, okay? You may not like the other commissioner, okay? You don't vocalize that. That is not something that goes out to the public. You are one body, and your decision is a one-body decision, okay? And if you're divided, and that is displayed publicly in the sense of that kind of demeanor in that, there are people watching. Again, if you remember what I like to look at many applicant attorneys as and things like that, they're watching because if I don't get the decision I get, could that be enough that technically I could get that decision reversed and thrown out? So if you're engaged in those kinds of things where you talk about the recommendations or the process, oh, that recommendation, I disagree with the rest of the planning commission, you may well, and you had your opportunity to vote, okay? But the commission spoke. End of discussion. You don't go out there because you're disgruntled that you lost in that vote and start rabble-rousing and talking to others, because all of a sudden that becomes fodder, okay? And it can become legal fodder that can be used by somebody who has felt wronged by the recommendation. And that jeopardizes the whole process, okay? You may not like the process, and it's okay to criticize the process outside of a case. Your job, you may come back to staff near the end of the meeting when it's commissioner comments and go, you know, I really don't like this site plan review process. Yeah, we just don't feel comfortable. Is there a way that we could blah, 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 blah? That is fine. As a body, to give staff direction to say, hey, can you look at this? Can we make it easier? Is there something here? This step seems wrong. That is part of your job. okay? And it's very appropriate, and staff will take that direction and they'll respond to that direction for you. But to go out in another forum and blow off steam, if you will, because you were on the wrong side of a vote is not appropriate criticism. There's a right way and a wrong way to handle that, okay? It's okay to come up to the staff afterwards too and go, you know, I voted on this, but quietly what I want you to know is I do have an issue with this process. Can we sit down and talk sometime? That's what they're there for. They're a resource to you to better understand why maybe it goes the way it does or where there could be improvements made, okay? That's the privilege you have. As a planning commissioner member, staff's not gonna like me for this. You have 24/7 access to these folks. 365, right? You can call them up on Christmas Day if you want to. Not really, but I know. Please don't. But you know, but they are a resource for you on those kinds of things. That's the privilege. That's the privilege of the seat. Okay. City council members have the same thing. Mayor has the same thing, right? They have the privilege to approach city staff through the appropriate channels and have a discussion. Your appropriate channel is right into the director's office for the department. Theirs is usually the city manager's office. Their first contact should be the city manager, and then it filters into the administrative system that way. Yours is the planning commission, the planning director. Okay, that's your point of contact, point of access, especially on issues that are process oriented. Your staff planner, like Bob was your staff planner tonight on this case, I think Larry would say it's okay for you to approach that staff planner with a question ahead, but keep him informed, keep him copied in, let Larry know you're doing it, you know. But the staff planner is going to probably be the most knowledgeable of the actual case and may be able to answer you most appropriately. Interactions, be friendly and welcoming. You see that on both those, the same thing. Don't engage in prolonged conversations. Just don't. You're just better off. Even after the meeting, you're just better off. It's better to sit up here at the dais and let the room filter out and let people go home before you go out, okay, than it is to get out there and get bombarded by people who wanted to and have a conversation and you inadvertently say something wrong, okay? It's just easier. Any thoughts on that? One of the reasons I stress findings of fact in all of this too is when you make your motion and you adopt the staff report, it does become kind of a record of the findings of fact unless you state something differently. That's because as far as the record is concerned and as far as you being approached, that is the clear indication as to why that motion was passed or not passed, okay? At the end of the day, that's it. The rest of your opinions don't matter. From the city's standpoint, the problem becomes if I can find a weakness and I can get 3 planning commissioners to say to me, well, I really didn't understand the case, guess what happens? That legal advisor starts asking a little more questions, starts digging around and starts going, they didn't even know what they were doing when they made the motion. Let's challenge this in court. There's no clear record of findings of fact. There's no certain recommendation through the motion that was made. I think that's why, even though that reading of the motion gets a little bit arduous, that record is important. Establishing that in the official record is very, very important because that is what you're determining. End of discussion. Okay, so be aware of that. You want to be, we were talking about this with the Planning Commission chair, right? That leadership. Respect it and assist them with it. It's okay, and I felt for Tori, you know, a couple meetings ago when Tori was doing her best, right? But it's not something she always does. Your vice chair is not always in that role. Even though they're here every day, it's kind of like going to church, right? If you go to church, you should be used to the liturgy and everything that's in front of you and what's going on. But it's amazing when the screens disappear and the writing isn't there, kind of what happens. So it happens the same way. You're used to that vice chair position and you're in that secondary role, but then this gets heaped on you and you go, yeah, I've watched it 100 times, but, right? And she did a nice job of times where she was a little unsure. She went to the staff for that resource. And I think that's important, but you all can help guide that too and help that person along. You can help the chair in how you're interacting with them. Some of you have sat in these positions before. Some of you have much more experience than others, and it's okay to help the chair out. in a guiding way, okay? So I think you should be aware of that. Pay attention to speakers. We've talked about body language, texting, and other activities. My favorite story from the city of Wichita is we had a gentleman who was, he had issue upon issue upon issue. In every city council meeting, he spoke in the public part of the meeting. He took his 5 minutes. If you listen to him closely, there were kernels of some really good ideas and some really good thoughts. But he came up so much that all you had to do is watch the people at the dais, and the minute he came up to the podium, they would lean back in their chairs, and you could see the eyes roll and go, here we go again for another 5 minutes, and they weren't even listening to him, paying attention. Pay attention to these folks. That's the best guidance I can give you. Sometimes there is just that one instance where no matter who that person is, they've brought up a question or an idea where you go, wait a minute, that makes sense. I wonder if. You need to listen to them. The texting issue I talked about earlier. We talked about funneling the discussion through the Planning Commission and the chair in particular. You see the listen again. Avoid designing and negotiating from the dais, especially directly with the applicant. It's okay to question some things with the staff about the design. That's part of the conversation. And to indicate, hey, I think I'd feel more comfortable with this if we tweaked it this way or that way, and to have that discussion. But when you're engaged in a conversation with me as an applicant and we're renegotiating the plan before us that's been worked on for sometimes several months, right, to get to this point, that's problematic, okay? And it does open up the city to a lot of issues. It's worse when the city council does it. And as I was saying with the Planning Commission in Olathe, if you want to watch the Olathe City Council, there are times that I felt very uncomfortable as a planner watching what they were doing with negotiating directly in a public hearing, or it wasn't even the public hearing, because the public hearing was with the Planning Commission. In the public conversation, they invited the folks up, and they're having a renegotiation of elements of the project. That's pretty brutal to me as a planner. I think it disrespects the work that the staff's done. I think even though the applicant's willing to do it, many times they feel like, I just spent several months getting to this point and now we're renegotiating with you all. It just sets a bad tone, okay? So just be aware of that. It is okay to question design decisions and things that are coming up. Did everybody, I don't want you to answer this question. This is a hypothetical question. Did everybody agree with staff's assessment on the administrative adjustments tonight? If you did not, the appropriate time to mention that is at the time it was being brought up, and that is a discussion with staff, okay? And the discussion goes something like this, right? It's, Bob, help me understand how this trade-off seems equitable to you. I'm not seeing 2 benches being equitable to 20% of transparency. Help me understand that. That's an appropriate question to ask. I'm using that as an example. I'm not saying any of you had that thought. I want to make sure, since we're streaming, that everybody understands that's not what this is. You have made your decision. You heard those administrative adjustments. You did everything right. You made the appropriate motions, and you approved that, okay, for tonight. I'm just using it as the example to say, if I'm dealing with a design issue like that, it is okay to raise those questions, but do it the right way. Do it appropriately, okay? Don't sit there with the applicant and go, well, how about if we just did this? Could we move this? How do you think about that? I think this would be a little bit better than that. That's not your role at that point. And it's really not the applicant's role to negotiate it at that point either. Okay? Questions on any of that? Where are we at time-wise? We're doing okay. We're getting there. Ask pertinent questions, very critical, okay? Now, some of these questions should be familiar to you. When I was doing this in Nebraska, it's amazing. There's no guidance as to what are valid criteria for me to make my recommendation based on. You know, I mentioned before, you have the golden criteria from that court case that are now integrated into your code. Kansas has that built-in guidance system, which is great. Many states don't. So what I use that guidance system when I'm talking to people in other states and go, here are the questions. These are the things your realm encompasses. These are the kinds of things you should ask about or don't ask about. You'll notice that first one about don't asking questions. Do not get engaged in conversations about those people. okay? When does that come up? Usually when it's a development involving apartments, okay? And we all know those people, that's not what I bought into when I bought my house, okay? Your realm has nothing to do about passing judgment on people who rent. That's not what you're here for, okay? You're here to determine if the physical development before you fits into the development pattern that you envision for the future of this community, and if it makes a detrimental impact on adjacent properties and other elements of the community, the infrastructure and things like that. That's what you're there to focus on, okay? Never get engaged in a conversation about those people. Just as never make a predetermined judgment about an individual who's up here making a presentation for a case. I had a gentleman in another state, in another city, not too long ago as we were doing this training, who asked the question. So Dave, I voted against a development because I didn't like the lifestyle of the applicant. I had a moral disagreement with the way he lives his life. Yeah. Guess what? That's not your job. Don't go there. Again, those people, that's not where you should be if you're on this commission, okay? Every citizen is equal before you. You have to be objective, okay? And sometimes you have to battle that internally. It's hard, but that's your job, okay? So do watch out for that. Affecting existing businesses. The name of the business. Look, if it's a Walmart or a Target, doesn't matter. Your job is not to make a determination based on the brand name. I'm sorry. I do know that some brands have better reputations than other brands. I get it. I get there's a reason why that cup's covered up in the convenience world, right? There's a lot of people who tell you Quick Trip's the best place in the world. If you can get a Quick Trip, we're right there, right? And they do have a reputation that precedes them. But guess what? You have to look at Quick Trip, Valero, Casey's, all of those things equally. They are convenience stores. You're looking at the use. You're looking at design elements and physical pieces. You're not looking at the brand name. That's hard for people to understand. I've been in battles over Walmarts. This is going to kill local business. This is going to do this. How many more apartments do we need? What? Blah, blah, blah. That market determination, that's the risk of the developer making the proposal, okay? Your job is to look at the parameters. Your role is this physical environment parameters that are set by the tone of your development ordinances and policies. So be aware of that. So these questions not to ask are very important, okay? Lease rates? No, that's not your realm. Financing packages? Not your realm. That's a city council realm. If they choose to TIF a project, if they choose to issue IRBs, if they choose to do a CID, if they choose, that's their realm. It's not your realm. You're not here to make a determination because you don't like the financing package. Okay? So just be aware of that, or the incentives. You may not agree with incentives, but
I had a
you're in a
question.
different place. I'm gonna go here first and then I'll come to you. Okay?
That's fine.
Go ahead.
A lot of times the public will bring up these questions and the developer will answer them. We may not have asked it, but we hear the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So how are we supposed to manage that?
There's nothing you can do about that part of it, okay? But what you can do, if we're managing the meeting correctly, that person should be raising up the question, addressing you all. It is perfectly okay, before it goes much further, to have the chairman go, I just want you to know, ma'am or sir, that we're not really here to consider that aspect of the business plan or those financial terms or anything like that. We are focused on the land use decision-making process here, or review process here. So I just want you to be aware that we're not considering that as part of tonight's conversation, okay? Now, if the other person comes up and they voluntarily give that and it's out there, that's fine, but don't let that predicate your judgment. Don't make that the reason that you're gonna go against the thing, okay? Or for it or whatever. You can't do anything about the conversation, okay? You can try to manage it the best you can, keep them focused. That's why that whole element of keeping the people focused on you, it's part of the reason the podium's here and not, back in here with the mob, right? Rome is the mob. Part of that is because they should be focused on talking to you, not turning their back on you and having this. Okay? And it's okay for your planning commission chair to say, sir or ma'am, could you please turn, you're here to address the commission, not the audience tonight. Okay? And it's okay to do that, but you do it kindly, right? You do it with some grace. You know, you try to manage it. You try not to be offensive in it, and you go from there. Okay? Certainly once the beans are spilled, there's nothing you can do. Okay? Many times the developer will be leery of even mentioning it because they have certain agreements where they can't disclose things at that point in time. So they'll try to avoid the question, and that gets a little uncomfortable because you might have that inkling to say, well, I want to know. In reality, they can't tell you because they have some contractual agreement for non-disclosure or something to that effect. And so they're trying to avoid the question, and it does look like they're trying to avoid the question, and the reason is they can't tell you. And you have to respect it. You don't have a choice there. So you have to watch for those things, and you can't take that as, well, I'm trying to avoid your, what you're asking. Sometimes they just can't answer it. They're not able to. Okay? Volunteering, that kind of stuff, there's nothing you can do. Probably the latest thing, I think, Larry, that with state legislation that's really impacted this is really regarding the cell tower communications and small cell network legislation that the state passed, where they actually put certain parameters on the localities as to what information we can even ask for from those providers when they bring an application in. There's certain things now we can't even ask for. Now, if they voluntarily supply it, that's a whole nother thing. But we can't sit there and say, well, you can't get any further in the process until I get this information. Or, your application depends on getting this. There are certain elements now, like business plans and location pieces and things like that, that we can't even ask about from the staff standpoint. The hard part is those are getting placed into public forums sometimes on special use permits and conditional use permits. And the inkling and the question is always, well, how many more of these towers do they need and how are they spaced and everything? Well, guess what? They don't necessarily have to tell us all that. Okay? And we have to be careful with that. I think that's probably the latest kind of legislation piece where we've had that set of parameters. Yeah, I think at the state level, that's been it. So, provide meaningful recommendations. We're about to wrap up here. So, maintaining integrity is a responsibility. Okay? Be aware of that. Maintaining integrity is a responsibility. Okay? The value of local government lies in how much the people trust the integrity of its government to do the right thing. This is becoming a huge debate in this country, and it's not just at the government level, it's at a personal level too. Okay? Trust, integrity, respect, those words have meaning. We've begun to lose a lot of what the meaning is behind those. Most people are looking for consistency, fairness in application, equitability, right? We want to be treated fairly, right, consistently. The baseball player stands in the batting box, wants to know that the umpire is going to make a consistent call. We can debate the lines of the strike zone all day we want. At the end of the day, those lines get a little blurred depending on who the umpire is. But when I'm in the midst of the game and I keep coming up to the bat, I want to know that if he called the strike 3 out at that location, that I know that's one of the parameters. So when I see that ball come in that direction, I know I probably need to swing. Okay? That's part of integrity. Okay? It's the inconsistency that really creates the problem for applicants and other things. Well, they might decide this or they may not. I don't know. Last time it was this. Oh gosh, what are we really looking for? What's staff asking now? What's going on? They want that consistency. They want to understand enough about what's going on that they can play within the parameters of the game, and they know those parameters will be equally applied across applicants. That's a key issue. That has come into question more and more and more over time. Okay? And some of it is the fault of the planning process and the planning systems. I'm going to be real delicate with this because it's something that I've observed. part of what's going on, and it's happened over the 30 years I've been doing this, I've watched it happen. The questions that have come from the planning process and the planning commissions and the city councils have grown into areas that go beyond the scope of what the role of the process is, okay? Natural questions began to be asked more and more about design, more and more about who are the players, who are going to be the people that you're going to use in or have in these developments, what's going to happen. They started blurring this, and the questions got further and further out there. So the reaction was codes got more and more prescriptive, and we asked for more and more information, and we started really sitting there and making this process even more than what it originally was, which was land use questions. If we go back to the original Euclidean zoning, back at the basis of what we're doing as planners, that was really a land use oriented conversation. Does this use belong in this location around or near these uses? And it was a very defined conversation. Over time, it complicated that conversation. It's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And we've somehow decided that the more complex the situation is, the more regulations we need to have, and the more we have to get information. And now you're seeing pushback that's saying, look, you've asked for so much information. You're asking for all of this stuff. You're doing all this thing. Where does your realm end, right? So all I'm explaining here is that that's an evolution that's going on. It's not necessarily a fault here locally. It's not necessarily a fault. I've just been watching that planning realm as we've gotten into areas where we quite frankly asked planning commissions to be architects. We've asked planning commissions to be landscape architects. We've asked planning commissions to be planners. We've asked them to be engineers. We've asked them to be, by revealing this information to them, okay? And it sometimes makes the commissioners very uncomfortable because that's not my education. That's not my background, but yet I have this question about it. That's why you rely on your staff. That's why when Bob says the city engineer has looked at this, you need integrity, you need confidence, you need to trust that that process has worked and that the expert has rendered an opinion on that. Now, I'm not saying you blindly just believe the staff. You still ask the question. But understand, you're asking the question from the point of, I need to have that knowledge to feed me to feel comfortable with what I'm about ready to do as a recommendation. Don't become the engineer. Don't become the architect. Don't become the landscape architect, okay? But become the objective person that you're supposed to be to render the recommendation of, do I believe this is a good development for our community in its totality? That's what you're there to look at. Does that make sense to you all? I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm just talking about that evolution. It's part of the reason codes have gotten into urban design and other issues. And so as we do that, as we evolve, as we get there, it makes these decisions much more difficult, if you will, much more complicated, okay? So you're always reinforcing integrity in the process, okay? You want to formulate relevant reasoning or findings of fact. You want a clear understanding and record of why the Planning Commission is making its recommendation, because you don't want all those things to confuse the record, okay? You just want to be making a good decision, okay? I won't go into a lot of this. You can see here, you know, you can find reasoning for decisions in the comp plan and various development studies and the capital improvements plans all over the place. The purpose statement of a zoning district gives you findings of fact, okay? It's all there. Staff uses it as part of their recommendation process. Have enough familiarity with those things that you understand that if you feel you're going to make a motion different than what staff has done, you've got a way to outline those findings of fact by using those items. In Lenexa, when I was community development director, the case that was amazing to me when I was first hired, the mayor came up to me after the process of being hired, but before the first set of meetings that we had in that role, and he said to me, Dave, the one thing I would hope that you and the staff would do is allow us to make decisions. And what that meant is our staff was doing such a good job of justifying its own recommendations that the council was actually intimidated to go against the staff. Yet they're the decision maker. And so what I tried to teach staff is you have to do an analysis that is relatively neutral and point out where there are conflicts in some of these policy documents, where the comp plan may actually say one thing over here, but may also say something over here. that isn't necessarily aligned, okay? And then your job is to try to give that importance. What's the important piece? What is the piece that brings us together? And ultimately, the city council, as the policymakers, are the ones that give that direction. So the mayor does that. I'm trying to train the staff to kind of rethink the way they're doing their reports. And we got into a case on a set of apartments, and it's not too far, it was off K10 in the Ridgeview area. And there was some recent policies about wanting an interchange at that location, and there was commercial development. And of course, higher density is good for commercial development. More rooftops closer to the commercial development, the better off you are, right? But also, it was a residential single-family neighborhood out there. And if you looked at the policies in the comprehensive plan, they were a little bit in conflict. We were making financial commitments for certain types of development that would predicate apartments would be good. But yet we had a comprehensive plan that said this is going to be single-family neighborhood. So we brought up both points in the staff report. We still gave a recommendation, and our recommendation, based on the age of the comp plan and on the status of the policies that were currently being pursued, was we support the apartment complex with these conditions, so on and so forth. City council voted us down 7-0. Stuck with the neighborhoods. Said, no, the single family is where we want to go. My staff and a number of people in City Hall the next day all came up to me and said, how did it feel to lose? And I said, I didn't lose. I got policy direction for applicability in future cases. We had a conflict between our comprehensive plan and some of the decisions that were being made, and the city council sent a clear message that this is where we fall in this area of the city. So when the next apartment complex comes up, I get to talk to them about, I've got this policy, but I can tell you the recent decision that was made here, and this is what you're up against. I had clear policy direction. So it is okay, again, to have different opinions from the different roles. But one of our jobs as staff is hopefully to give you enough tidbits in that staff report that if you're thinking you want to go a different way, you can see that path in some of that writing. Okay, that's my belief, personally. But that doesn't always happen, so that leaves you to ask questions, which are perfectly appropriate to do. Okay? Is there anywhere else in the comprehensive plan where there may be a policy that contradicts what you're citing as a policy for this growth development? It's okay to ask staff that. They should be knowledgeable enough of the plan to answer that question. Should be. Okay? But that's where I said get familiar with the document. If you know the policies a little bit, you've read a little bit about it, you can actually say, hey, I saw a policy or goal 2, item C, objective C, says this, and it seems to be conflicting with the one that you've cited. Can you tell me a little bit more about the meaning of that item? Okay? That's a conversation that's very appropriate in this realm and should happen. Okay? So just be aware of that, because at the end of the day, we want consistency. I think I'm just about done here. Guiding questions, this is the questions that are really in your golden criteria, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those things. Just be aware of that. And I will say, there's one of those items that says there is a recommendation from professional staff or a consultant. Take that recommendation seriously. These folks are doing their work. They're doing their job, okay? And they're doing their job under good parameters, and they're holding to trust and integrity through the process. They are firm believers in the trust and integrity of the process. Every staff planner is that way, okay? I guarantee you that. They're not here to just make up things and present them to you and say, I like it, so you all should like it. Okay? That they don't do that. There is no part of that that enters into this scheme. But they are looking for that interaction, that ability to see things and get an understanding of what you believe is the preferred direction of the overall community. I think that's all I have. I know we've gone about an hour and 10, 15 minutes or so, but I wanted to get through that because, again, this is pretty, just a good foundational overview of the role that you have, the responsibilities that go with that role, and I hope you're taking those seriously. I believe from my observing it, I believe you are. Okay, I believe you're trying to do the right thing in everything you're doing. I haven't seen anything that tells me, oh boy. Now there's times we slip, and there's times that things are said, there's times that, and that happens, okay? and that's okay. I'm just not seeing anything that tells me that the integrity of this group is hurting or that there's an issue with that. So I just want to make sure that you understand that. This is very important stuff to me. It's not about what the law says. It's about how government is perceived in our cities and the role of planning in that perception. And your method, your process, your way, how you go about things says a lot about this government and the governance in Gardner. And I hope you're taking that privilege seriously. So more questions on that. I'm done with this formal presentation.
Any questions?
I feel like it was a little bit of a
Actually, I did. Without getting into specifics, we've seen some very good examples of initial plat requests and rezoning requests, and then because of the process of the meeting, that what actually came back in a final plat or a final layout was significantly improved.
Mm-hmm.
And what my concern is how far can we go? If it's by staying our lane, we say, all right, this is the preliminary plat or the preliminary approval.
Mm-hmm.
We're good with, because it generally meets the guidelines and the criteria. We have to stay in our lane and do that.
Mm-hmm.
How far can we go to try to address, to make sure that our citizens feel like they're being heard, or that their property is being respected, or that their investments are being respected in a final plat? I mean, that, you kind of see where I'm going?
I think so, and I want to differentiate too. You're using plat and plan, and I want to make sure we differentiate a little bit.
Initial plan and an initial
Right.
in a final plan.
So yeah, I think that's what you meant.
Yes.
And what I want to
Sorry, I used the
clarify,
wrong word.
I did, because the last meeting I wanted to make this comment also. So I'm gonna say something about plats since you kind of said that. I hope everybody understands what the role is with plats. That the plat is a very technical document, number one, and really you're there to assess if it met the technical requirements of
Right.
the plat. It has nothing to do with the development. It's nothing. You can actually approve a plat and disapprove of the plan. Okay? Because the plat is doing nothing more than setting the parameters of the property. And in fact, if the staff has made a report that says it meets all the technical parameters that are required for a plat, you're somewhat obligated to approve that plat.
Right.
Okay, so plats are very different than plans in that sense. I cannot think of very many instances where you should be voting against a plat, because the plat shouldn't appear to you in an inadequate manner. Okay, so I just want to make that clarification, because you interchanged the terms a little bit, and I do know there's confusion. I've had to explain that even the role of the city council in plat approval is very different, especially final plat. All they're really doing is accepting the dedications and easements at that point. They're not really approving the plat. They're accepting the dedications and easements to the public at that point in time. So it's a little bit different parameter as to what they're doing in the platting process. Plan-wise, the preliminary plan is very, very critical. Okay, because it is your opportunity to truly influence the design and say, these are the conditions. If we give you an approval, we're expecting these things to be improved. We're expecting this to happen in the final plan, okay? Because you really are giving guidance to the final plan. And the final plan needs to substantially comply with the preliminary plan that was approved, okay? Making improvements in that time period between, okay, so if they're responding to your comments and they're making some adjustments and improvements that really make it better, your staff may make the assessment and come back to you and say, here are the changes you're going to see, and they're addressing these issues, and we believe this is an improvement over what it was. That's your first indication that you're perfectly fine, right? Because you're getting those improvements through that kind of a process where you've outlined conditions, and when they're coming back with the final plan, they're basically addressing the improvements. What you don't necessarily want to do is be renegotiating the design between preliminary and final. If the applicant comes back to staff and says, between the preliminary approval and today where I'm filing my final, we've made some changes in our design concept, the staff really needs to make a determination if actually a revised preliminary plan has to be resubmitted to you versus a final plan. And that comes down to the parameters of the regulations and whether they have stayed within the spirit of the previous approval or not. So they're going to come to you with that. If it gets to you with those changes, they're going to be justifying why it got to you that way. Okay. But the preliminary plan is really where you have the opportunity, and you really should take that as your one opportunity to influence that design parameter. At the final stage, they are really, and I think the code even says this in certain portions, that really at the final stage, and this is sometimes why finals are on consent and other things, if they're exactly the same, there's really no discussion at that point. It's just simply getting done. I'm gonna let Kelly, because there's some nuances in what I'm saying. I'm talking in generality, so go ahead, Kelly.
Well, we don't discuss the landscaping or the building elevations in a preliminary development plan, so if you're talking about design in that sense,
Then it's a
building
different-
design,
right.
then yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking,
I'm talking about screening, I'm talking about transitioning, things in that from one land use or one type of use to another type of use.
and if that's landscaping, I think what I'm hearing Kelly saying is if that's landscaping, that detail's coming into the final.
Right.
That's when it's
That's
feeding.
when it comes into the
And you
final.
you certainly do have the ability to make the comments and the conditions on that piece because you've not seen it before. It's really about that base set of preliminary items. If that substantially changes, what you're getting is the preliminary items. If that element starts substantially changing, that's when that decision has to be made. Is this really a revised preliminary versus a final at that point? But new items, like Kelly's talking about, the structures, the landscaping, those things that are new to you, yes, in this conversation, there may be conditions that you say, yeah, we'll give you approval, but we want this addressed, or we want this change, or we're looking for this element. And usually the staff is bringing you those conditions if there are any, but you may see some others that you'd like to have. I'm gonna make sure I look over here just in case Michelle has anything. Okay. So does that help? I mean, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, again, it's all about your working relationship with staff in those processes. And don't be afraid to ask that question in the case, setting. Can I talk about this as a potential condition for the landscape? Because we haven't seen the landscape thing before. Give me a little more detail. You're perfectly within your realm there. Help? Not help. He's got that kind of look like he's got about 3 other questions coming up, but he's not sure which ones they are. We'll come back. I mean, I want to make sure.
We'll address it later on.
Okay, all right.
All right, do we have any other questions? No. All right, thank you for your information.
No problem. Like I said, there's your resource team this side too. I'll use both. I'm right-handed, so I tend to. So this is your resource team. Utilize them. You're lucky to have a team. I do some plan commissions with some communities. I don't have the city attorney there. It's me and sometimes the assistant city manager who's really there just turning on the recorder for the record keeping. And sometimes we get into some issues where we're trying to make decisions and you're going with the best you can. You have a team of people that are here with you the whole time. Use them as a resource. Okay? That's all I got.
Thank you.
Sorry it went so long.
Thank you.
Okay, if the commissioners have nothing further, I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion to adjourn by Commissioner McNear and a second by Commissioner Benner. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0. We are adjourned.
Abstention